Shalom, shalom to everyone today. We are going to look at the Parashat Shemini. As always, there are always so many golden nuggets within the Parashas. And every time and every year we reread these Parashas, we always find new insight. And it's been over these years that this this few books that we find in this combined book called the Scriptures are taking us a lifetime to understand, and I don't think we will ever understand all the detail and intricacies of the Scriptures. So God bless. It's every time it's fresh, it's new, it's manna from heaven, and I would like to discuss some of these golden nuggets within the parashas, but not going to go through every verse, but just highlight some of the things that and concepts, or maybe an idea that has really struck me in the heart, and I would like to share that with you. The name of this parasha is called Shemini, which actually comes from the word eighth, which we find in Leviticus 9 verse 1. And as always, the number 8 indicates most of the times to new beginnings. So when we see number 6 in the Hebrew Gematria, it refers to the humanity or human. 7 is normally completeness or fullness. Number 8 indicates to a new beginning, but also the number 8 also alludes to a departure from the natural to the supernatural. And when we start dealing with and reading some of these concepts within the Parashat Shemini, we would be encountered with some of these departing from the natural to the supernatural. Why did God choose, the creator of the universe, choose for certain animals to be called unclean and some to be clean? Some of these laws are called chukim. It's not for us to really understand why, but sometimes it's just to read, to accept, and to do. So in a nutshell, I would like to cover some of the topics within this parasha. So we find the 7-day inauguration of Aaron and his sons was completed, and the ceremonies for this altar, the consecration of this altar, had begun. And we find that the number 7 gematria again indicates to a full perfection and completion, and therefore on the 8th day. So the 7 days were finished, the number or the time was completed, it was perfected, and therefore on the 8th day we find that the inauguration of the priest and his sons. So Nadab and Abihu, who we read that they brought a strange fire before God. And I don't want to specifically deal today relating to the subject of what was the strange fire and what did they do, and why. I think this is a topic that can be discussed more in detail, or even on a separate teaching itself. But it's quite interesting that we read in the preceding verses that the sacrifices were placed on the altar, and a fire came down, or fire from God came down and consumed these sacrifices on the altar. Now, some of the commentaries allude to the fact that Nadab and Abihu actually, when this fire came down to the altar, it is a holy time and space, and they came with a strangeness or a strange fire before God, and then this specific fire that was currently on the altar also consumed them. And it's quite interesting if we read in the verses that the tunics were actually intact. So we find that this specific fire was not a fire that charcoaled and burned the clothes. That the commentaries in the actually Chumash tells us that the tunics were intact and they were carried out with these tunics. Moses and Aaron subsequently disagree as to eating of the meat of the sin offering after the death of Aaron's two sons. So they disagree, and this shows us a certain concept, and again I'm going to touch on this concept, but there's so much to say. But we have found as a community that we have discussed so many topics in the parashas, and we've had so much different opinions, and thank Hashem, thank God for the fact that our community, we stay together, but we disagree on various topics. So it shows us that if Moses and Aaron could have a disagreement between them relating to the specific eating of the sacrificed, or this meat of the sin offering, how much more for us today that we are really so far removed from the actual context and understanding of the context and in that time period. So we have disagreements. I would almost say it's normal that we could have disagreements, because we just have different contexts and understanding of what the actual text means. But there is a golden nugget within this specific verses where we find that Moses, and we see something very important in this text in Leviticus 10 verse 20, after the disagreement between Aaron and Moses, that it says Moses vayishma, meaning that he heard. So when heard Moses, he was content. He saw that and he was content. So this Hebrew gives us a bit of an insight that says Moses vayishma, meaning that he heard. But it doesn't mean that he actually heard with his ears. I don't think this is what Torah means. The Torah alludes here to the same Deuteronomy 6 verse 4, Devarim 6 verse 4, where it says Shema Yisrael, says Hear, O Israel. This alludes to a much different type of hearing, not listening, but a different type of hearing, not with the ears, but with the heart. And I believe that the specific verse, when it alludes that Moses heard, that he actually heard with his heart, his understanding what was his heart, and he was content in his own eyes. And I would like to apply that to ourselves today, specifically when we get together as a community discussing various topics in the parasha. Sometimes we have to listen less with our actual ears and start listening with our hearts, and sometimes understand why do we have an agreement or disagreement, or why do we have this specific person having this point of view. Sometimes it's just their context. Where does this agreement coming from? And I think if we do this most of the time, we will find that 90% of our frustration when we get to certain agreements will disappear, because we are listening to the other person, not with our ears. And for many years, I even, when a person says something, various verses and other references in the Torah, suddenly jumps into my mind, and when actually you need to listen to a person you're already working and midrashing in your head about counter arguments and so on. So sometimes we just have to relax, to stop, to listen, to hear what the person is saying, and then we'll find that if Aaron and Moses can disagree, we can also disagree within a community. But when Moses listened to Aaron's explanation why he disagreed, in the eyes of Moses he found contentment. And a lesson for us today, let's find this contentment when we find ourselves in some of these situations. Um, so we find also then the laws of clean and unclean animals, and also differentiation between the impure and the pure. So the impurity and the purity before God. So that's in a nutshell the various topics that's been covered in the Parashat of Shemini. But I would like to specifically address something that it's two themes that highlighted itself from the Torah text, and that's the whole concept of purity and holiness. The Hebrew word tahor for purity, and kadosh, and you'll see these. I'll explain the different spelling for kadosh, holiness. So purity in itself, there's actually not a bit of a lot of misunderstanding among people about the conceptual meaning of what purity is. If we say or we talk about purity, most of us would already have the context. Well, it is clean, it is pure, it's undefiled, it's not mixed, it is actually pure. So we don't have a a a contextual difference between people when we talk about purity. But I would like to say the holiness it's something completely different. That when it comes to holy, when we talk about the actual word holiness, and specifically for our for our community and for people that have not grown up in the Hebrew language, we would not have this automatic um, roots where we get our meanings from. So holiness among people have absolutely different frameworks and different understandings of holiness itself. And I believe this is the same when we get to the word spiritual or spirituality. What does it actually mean when we talk about spiritual or spirituality? Is it something that is not tangible? Is it something that you have to attain? Is it a place that we have to get to? What does spirituality actually mean? And I want to say the same for the word God. Um, People come to me and they say, "Oh, God bless you," and I look at them and I say, "But in your framework, who are you referring to when you talk about God? What is your framework?" And sometimes we would find that our opinions and our framework is completely different when we even just talk about the word God. And for me, God is not a Santa Claus where you pray and he gives, like we've seen in many of the movements today. Is that um, it's all about how much we can claim, how much spiritual power we have to to basically just pray and God gives. Um, but in my own terms, when I refer to God, and I say to many people that for the sometimes for the sake of argument, I would not refer to God. I would like to use the Jewish concept of Hashem, the name, um, because we can be among people and we talk about God and we have different concepts and For me, God would be the creator of the universe, a God, a being that is not comparable to any other being. That would be my framework when we speak to God. So when it comes back to holiness, what do we refer to when we speak to holiness, and we refer to holiness in itself? Well, I have to say to you that many people that I've met have still thought that holiness is this actual little picture that you see on the screen. It was many, many years ago. It was actually a TV show called The Saint. And for many people, it's about the halo above your head. That is holiness. And tongue in cheek, when the brightness of your halo is more or less, that determines your level of holiness. So that might be a framework for some people regarding when they refer and speak to about holiness. In other cases, we get the idea that holiness is absolutely being holy, or getting to a certain state of being. Then we are holy, and to maintain this holiness, we just have to elevate ourselves to a level where we don't mix with other people and the mundane things of life. So we have to get rid of that out of our lives, and so on. So and that might be, and this is what we have seen in many of the faiths in the early fathers, where the church fathers, where they abstained, and still today they abstain of many things, because the concept and the framework, well, this is holiness. So let's look at Leviticus 10 verse 10. And if we read it, we find that it's written that we should be distinguishing between what is holy and what is unholy, and between what is unclean and what is clean. And the word there used in holy is akodesh. So we have still the same idea of, okay, but what does holy and unholy actually mean? So as previously before, there is so many things and frameworks for people when they talk about holiness. But looking at the dictionary and looking at the root words, we find that kodesh have the connotation of something that is separate, something that is very distinct, something that is set aside or set apart, dedicated, or even consecrated. So it's like a Rubik's Cube. Hebrew is very multidimensional, depending on the framework and the context of the text. It takes on the meaning of that context, and we find that God tells us that we have to distinguish between what is separate, distinct, set apart, dedicated, and consecrated, and that which is not separate, not distinct, which is not set apart or not consecrated. So if we look again at Leviticus 11:44, God commands us to be kedushim, for I am Hashem your God, that you shall consecrate yourselves and you shall be kedoshim. It refers to kedoshim because I am, and we read again, I am kadosh. We see that there is a difference between these words, kadosh and kadoshim, and we find in the three letters, every Hebrew word has got a root letters, and the root letters in kadosh or kedoshim is your kuf, dalet, and a shin. So we find between these two that when it refers to holiness, to the mundane or the man aspects, it's written without a vav, And when it refers to holiness, specifically referring to the godly holiness, it is spelled with a vav. So we can basically see kadosh when it refers to kadosh. For I am kadosh, holy. It's got the vav inside. And you shall be kedoshim. It will find that there is no vav in the words. And it's quite interesting to look at this difference, and we ask ourselves, but Torah always specifically on purpose do things, and we ask ourselves, but why, and what is this learning teaching us? So we find, if we just look at kadosh, and kadosh with and without a vav, we find that the letter vav is the sixth letter of the alphabet, having the numerical value of 6. So it's 6 is, we said, the number of man. The pictograph for vav looks like a tent peg, whereas the classical Hebrew script is constructed of a vertical line and adjacent yud. The meaning of the word vav is a hook, as a connecting hook used when the Mishkan was assembled. So the whole idea of a vav, that it's something that connects, it's something that holds together, it's something that secures. So it's quite interesting that we find in Genesis 1 verse 1, Bereshit 1 verse 1, it said, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. So that's the sixth word, the vav that we find. This is the principle of first occurrence. Where do we find vav the first time in the Torah? This is where we find it, in Genesis 1 verse 1. And specifically, it is the sixth letter of the alphabet. And if you count it, we'll find as Bereshit is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we find it in the sixth word of the Torah. So vav, in this case, is connected in the word ve'et, and as many as you know, it's a mystical meaning, because ve'et does not have a specific meaning, is always connecting something together. But we know from the Messianic point of view that the Aleph, Tav, the Alpha and Omega, refers to the beginning and to the end. And it's quite interesting that the sixth letter in the sixth word holds together Hashemayim, which is the heavens, and connecting, securing the Haaretz, the earth. So this letter Vav that we find in Kadosh, when it refers to the holiness of God, Kadosh, it finds that the heavenly is connected with the earthly, with the mundane. So when we talk about holiness, and we talk, but what is holiness? We first have to get to the concept that holiness is not taking ourselves out of this world and wanting to be heavenly minded and earthly good. That is not the concept of holiness, but we find that the Vav and the Kadosh tells us is that when we practice godly holiness, we can take the heavenly and we can connect it with the earthly. We can take the spiritual and we can connect it with the mundane things. So holiness refers and connects our spiritual lives with our mundane lives. And I think this is what I would like to refer to. In Hebrew, Kedusha, for instance, is the name of several prayers that is recited during a Jewish prayer service. That they refer to these prayers as Kedusha. In the Hebrew, the marriage is called Kedushin, because we've got two separate parties that came together in a unique union, and we've been separate, but we are still separate as human beings, but we come into a specific unity, and we connect together. So the marriage is called kiddushin, and for those who do a kiddush on Shabbat evenings, we it's a sanctification, as a blessing, reciting over the wine or the grape juice. We do a kiddush on Shabbat. So the holiness we find is always referring to something that we can connect to our main mundane lives, our physical lives that we have to live, and we live out every day. I would like to just return to this idea of kadosh with this distinct meaning of being separate, distinct, set aside and set apart, dedicated and consecrated, and take this idea and saying that, well, it's not that we separate and distinct and we become heavenly and we have to remove ourselves from the worldly things around us, but rather how can we connect this holiness with our mundane lives. So holy or holiness is not just a description or a specific state that we have to find ourselves to be in, but rather it's an action that has to be performed constantly. Holiness is not a destination that we arrive at, but it is rather something that we constantly work at. And these actions of being separate, being distinct, being set aside, being dedicated, being consecrated in our mundane lives, it's these actions that that forms holiness. And the examples are it's so wonderful in this Parashat Shemini that God gave us actually instructions, or let's say instructions and directions in the Torah is how to take our mundane lives, our physical daily lives, and 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 be holy, and turn it into a holiness. Um, gave us instructions and actions to perform so that we can be holy, that we can be separate, we can be distinct, we can be dedicated, we can be consecrated. And where other place that we find in the Word that we can do this? Food. We have to separate our food. We have to be distinct with the food that we eat. We have to set aside and set apart, dedicate, consecrate. And this is what we read in these Parashat Shemini, is clean and unclean animals. And God says, be holy because I am holy. So it's referring to, I can give you an instruction, I can give you guidance, I can give you a way of practicing holiness in your everyday life. And we do this by food. Another is by time. God says, well, I want you to be separate, distinct, to set apart, to be dedicated and consecrated a specific time. And God says, the seventh day, call it a Sabbath, that is the seventh day. Um, if we take the previous, where it's food and sometimes utensils and things that we consecrate in our lives to God, the Sabbath is transcends the natural into the supernatural, because now we consecrate not just time, but what we consecrate that day, we consecrate ourselves, everything that we are on that Sabbath day, we rest on a Sabbath day. So God gives us a whole day to be holy, to be separate, to be distinct, to dedicate and to consecrate ourselves. And the same with dates. God gives us specific dates in the Torah, which refers to various feast days and other Sabbaths. So there are very specific dates, like we've just had with the various feasts, and also that's coming up. Um, these feast days are dates, it's a set apart, a distinct time. Um, so, yeah, God has given us ways of connecting the spiritual with the mundane lives. So, God asks us that we constantly distinguish between what is unclean, hatame, and the clean, hataor, uvein, and between the animal that may be eaten and the animal that may not be eaten. Food is basically every moment of our lives, if you think about it. We have to make decisions so many times: where I buy my fruit from, where do I eat, what do I eat, has it been in contact with other foods, and sometimes we have to think about all these things, and it's a way of connecting the spiritual with the natural. Every time we eat, we thank God for and for the health that we receive, for the money that we receive to actually buy this food. So that's God gives us a way that we use food and elevating our holiness and connecting the heavenly with the mundane lives. So we find that it is not the halo above our heads that refer to holiness. It is not a state of being. It is something that we constantly have to work at. We basically see that if we stop working on it, if we stop being separate, automatically we will return to our normal ways, and then we won't be consecrated. So holiness is not something, and it's not a place that we arrive at and then we are holy and we always will stay holy. It's something that we have to work on every day. We have to guard ourselves, to be holy, to be separate. And God has given this instructions in the Torah for us in this Parashat Shemini. So, in conclusion, God says, so what do we see from this parasha? We see Shema Yisrael. Shema is hear. Hear Israel. Hear with your heart what is written in this Torah. That God asks us to listen and to obey. I cannot explain why God has chosen specifically a pork or a pig to be unclean. I do not know why God has made a camel that it chews the cud, but it doesn't have a split hoof. God made it that way. So I cannot explain why God has made something clean and something unclean. But we know God did it, and He's asking us, if you want to practice holiness, you can do it by means of food. And this is the instructions I give you. This is the directions that I give you. This is the target that I give you to aim at to become holy, is listen to the Torah and obey. Separate your food. Use distinct food. Be distinct. Set aside, set apart your time. Dedicate yourself. Dedicate time in our lives every day. Dedicate our thoughts where we are every day. Consecrate ourselves by watching what we speak and what we say, because God says, be holy, be set apart, be distinct, be set aside, be dedicated and be consecrated, for I am all these above. I want to bless you with God's favor in this week to come, that He would talk to us constantly, remind us constantly that holiness is something that we can actively engage in our everyday lives, when we're at work, when we are in our cars, when we sleep, when we get up in the mornings, in our time, in our thoughts. We can be holy and we can live holiness.